Here on the corner is one of those late medieval tower houses, sort of the transition between the tower and the Renaissance palazzo. Here with its amazing crenellations. Let's see if we can get a decent view here. And as I've been given to understand, in fact, some of these palazzi had shops on the ground floor the way they do now, sometimes belonging to the wealthy merchant family that owned the palazzo, sometimes leased out or rented out for added income. These were very practical merchant aristocrats here in Florence in the 15th century. One wonders what the 15th century Medici would have thought of the late 16th century Medici and vice versa, or even the 14th century Medici, the founding patriarch of the great family, who in the late 14th, early 15th century, even though he was exceedingly wealthy, purposefully rode around on a donkey and wore very lower class looking clothing, because he knew that if he flaunted his wealth, it would generate envy, and that would be a danger for his family and his family's rise to power. So in essence, he kept under the radar, and in doing so, it allowed the family to really rise to the heights that it did. And it was the family, unfortunately, flaunting its power 3 generations later that landed it in exile for a good long while from Florence. But haha, they got their revenge. They came back as the Grand Dukes of Tuscany. So I suppose we know who won that Game of Thrones. The key to winning that Game of Thrones, though, was to get a member of the family onto the papal throne, because it was the Pope, the Medici Pope, I believe, who named them Grand Dukes of Tuscany. Sort of a circular thing, really. Ah, well, all forms of government are a shared hallucination, whether your title is president or king. It's a fiction that we've all agreed to follow, and nothing more. Here we have the shops on the bank, on this side of the Arno. Might be of interest to some of you. This is a vintage pop-up that supposedly was only going until February 6th. But that sign has changed. It is now a vintage pop-up until February 13th. The thing I hate about these vintage stores is that they're really just secondhand stores. And by calling themselves vintage, they're artificially inflating the price of their secondhand goods from what used to be a good way to dress yourself nicely but inexpensively, and is now a way to dress yourself nicely but very expensively. Rather sad, actually. The Ponte Vecchio that we're about to cross. Ahead of us, the arcade of the Correggio. Oh, God. I just have the name Vasily in my head, and that is absolutely not correct. Gosh darn it. Oh. Vasario. Jesus, Vasily. A Russian name. Something to do with Florence. Well, okay, that's not true. There were a lot of Russian emigres who took up root in Florence, especially apparently in the 19th century. Sort of aristocrats out on the grand tour. These are the gold shops that are still here. I'm uncertain whether they're still goldsmiths or if they're selling wares made elsewhere. But for those who haven't heard the story, the reason there are gold shops here now is because there used to be butcher shops, very sensibly, perched over the river so that they could drain the blood and other unwanted viscera straight from the animal into the river. Very clean. Well, when the Medici, as the Grand Dukes of Tuscany, moved to the other side of the river here, oltre Arno, to the Palazzo Pitti, they built that corridor up there. That corridor. And in doing so, they crossed the Ponte Vecchio. And well, apparently the Grand Duke was not very fond of the smell. And so he ordered the butchers removed and ordered something much more glorious and appropriate to their status as the Grand Dukes of Tuscany to take its place, the goldsmiths. And so this became the neighborhood of the goldsmiths. And it remains that to this day. So this, the Ponte Vecchio also has, several apocryphal tales. Sorry, I knocked my elbow on a little trash can. The Ponte Vecchio has several apocryphal tales tied to it. One of which is that it survived World War II because Hitler was romantic at his heart and loved the Ponte Vecchio too much to allow it to be destroyed. Well, I have it on relatively good authority that that is patently untrue. That is not how it survived. In fact, it was wired to be bombed just like the rest of the bridges because they were trying to stop the Allied advance through Italy, of course. More of the Correggio. And apparently, an old man, an old Florentine, went out in his little rowboat and defused the bombs, literally took the fuses away, as was possible in that era, thereby rendering the ordnance, the explosives, inert. They couldn't be set off. And so when the rest of the bridges were blown up, because the Germans were retreating, the Allies were oncoming, when that happened, the fuses weren't there, the bombs did not go off, and the Ponte Vecchio was saved. Had nothing to do with anyone's love. Nor did the Ponte Vecchio's preservation of bombing. Oh,